our time and not actually put some audio in. So in week 3, you should have all went out and got a copy of that Harvard Business article. Did it turn out to be $4? So your project charter is based on that case that you have to get at Harvard for $4.25. And again, we did that so that we didn't have to go through the bookstore and spend $15 for the same thing. So it's that Harvard Business case, Close or Us point of sale initiative. So if you go to Harvard Business School, this link should get you there, but you can also go to the Harvard Business cases and you should find Close or Us point of sale initiative. So there are, I think it is 22 pages, if somebody's got it in front of them. It does have some details in there that you're going to need for that charter. So you're going to create a charter. And so here is one example of a template. You can find hundreds of them out there. So this one just has a lot of the ideas in it. So this one, I believe I took from PMI.org. You can find that one. There is one at PM Documents that I said you can look at what they have, but unfortunately they've decided they're monetizing it. So you can find a lot of those resources out there of what all those pieces are. So you need that document from Harvard Business Case, that Close or Us, and you can certainly guess which clothing retailer it probably is pretty quickly once you start reading about it. But they have tried to protect names and hide the innocent. So you're going to create that charter. Now, I put in here the grading rubric for this. And again, this was done very carefully to not give you a step-by-step way to do it. You're going to have to do that critical thinking of what sections of that project charter are in there and what aren't. So, template completion. So really, I have some pieces in there. Does that mean if I miss one piece, you automatically get an 80%? No. But I want to show you that 75% of this grade comes out of that template area, making sure all the items are filled in, timeliness, and then writing mechanics. And most of you, as I'm looking through and grading the first ones, for the most part, writing mechanics are really good. I saw several people who used our writing lab, and the way I can tell that is they had turned on comments, and the writing lab comments were in there, and then they had been corrected. So you might want to turn that back off. It was interesting to see that. That's how our writing lab works and how they are doing that. But the comments were very appropriate about things like verb, agreement, whether it's plural or singular. So there were a lot of comments in there. So make sure you have somebody else proofread your documents. That's a great way to improve your scores. Are you serious? All right, let me after class work on that because it was available for purchase. How did you purchase yours? Oh, thank you, Harvard Business, for changing things around a little bit. All right, let me look at that. That did not show up anywhere before. So you had to register on a personal email, and then it was actually like $7 instead of. Interesting. Let me email them after class and see what. That is a new twist. I have not seen that because it shows up on mine as available for purchase as a student at 4.25. So that is interesting. And you used your Peru.edu account to try to do that? Not available for students. Weird. I love it when we look at external resources and they do those things to us. Let me look at that and see what the issue is. I might grab another case, and some of you might have a separate or different case then, if we have to do that. It won't make much difference in here in terms of that, other than that is an interesting thing. All right, so I will look at that and see why or what the issue is with that. So the grading rubric won't change on that, but and did you go directly off my link or did you search for it? Great. I love it when we rely on other people and they do those things to us. So I put that in there. There's a grading rubric in there. There's templates in there. You can find literally hundreds of examples of project charters completed to go look at. You can find examples of project charter templates if you search for them. And so it really is one of the first documents created. This is the piece that gives your project that formal authorization. And businesses do change the name of this. But it's more than, so in the little video they talked about scope of work or these different names. It really encompasses all of those aspects. It's not just that. But some companies do different things. So they may have a scope of work is what formally authorizes a project at that particular institution or business. And if you're at a very small business, it may be very informal. And so if you bring up the idea of doing a project charter, you may initially get some pushback that the owner says, well, by golly, it's my company. But what it does is it sets that formal tone and says, this really is a project. I have authorization to do it. And so it makes it a little harder for those kinds of things to change very, very quickly. So on that project charter, so you're looking at a case. Is it going to have every bit of information that you need to fill in that project charter? No. So a couple of things you can do. If you can figure out the name of the company, which probably isn't that tough, can I find out some of that information? I am also allowing you to creatively use fictitious or made-up information if you need to that fits. So what I'm not saying you're going to make up the entire document, but if you need to make up a name, that's fine and appropriate because a lot of these names have been changed anyway. But so for example, for the project sponsor, if you make up a name, but you make it up as Vice President of Services or something, that's appropriate. If you put in Mickey Mouse, probably not as appropriate. Does that make sense, Justin? I know. There could be a guy named Mickey Mouse, Vice President of Services. So use those titles and use your things you've learned in other business cases and business courses to be able to go back in and fill in parts of that document and that information. So that business case is not going to give you step by step. So if you do a Control F and you search for sponsor, it probably isn't going to give you an answer like you would like it to. You're going to have to read it and interpret it and come up with some of these items as we do this. So things like budgeting, you may have to go work backwards a little bit because the case is done in the it's already completed mode. You're going backwards and trying to recreate what would have happened at the very beginning of that. So you may find in there things like a budget. And they may talk about, my estimated cost was originally $23 million, and my final cost was $25 million. Well, that $23 million would be the number you use in the project charter. It's that idea that you're going backwards in time. You haven't turned quite into Marty McFly, but you're going backwards in time to try to recreate that project charter. You are certainly welcome to use this rubric that I've thrown in here. It does have most of the information. Are there times when you might have a longer stakeholder? So notice that the lines and the space available doesn't indicate the details that are in there. So you may have 10 people in your stakeholders. So use this as headings for your different things. So for example, here would be our summary budget. You would put that in there, but you may have 10 stakeholders. You may have 7 or 8 milestones as you read about that case. So they don't always fit that exact number. And no project should. This is not a cookie cutter template that says all projects have 4 stakeholders, all projects have 4 milestones. So don't use it for that purpose, but use it for those headers as you go through there. What this document should be, by the time you get done, it's probably at about that 3 to 4 page range again. I know, it's suspicious like that. So if your project charter you get done and you're half a page, you probably haven't put in enough effort. On the other hand, if you're 12 pages long, you've probably got too much detail for a project charter. And part of the problem with a project charter that's too long is that sponsor isn't going to sit there and read all of that. An executive, so think about it as an executive reading this. They have a lot of different projects coming to them, a lot of different items they need to deal with. They don't have time to read 12 pages. 3 pages you can flip through pretty quick and go through. You get 12 pages in a project charter, and you hand one in for 12 pages, somebody else hands in a nice 3-page, very nice summary for their project charter, and it's 1 or 2 projects are all that are going to be signed off on, you may have shot yourself in the foot by having too much information. And I know that's weird, and I'll promise I'll never say that in another class, that you can have too much information, but you actually can in a project charter. The other thing that can happen in a project charter, too much information, because you're projecting out all these things that are going to happen in a project. If you are too specific in detail and that project does not go exactly as planned, that can come back and bite you in the tuchus. So you want to have it clear, but yet allow yourself a little wiggle room. And I know that seems odd, but we know that projects are going to change and they're going to evolve. And if you've narrowly said that it's going to take exactly one person 1 minute to do a task, you've probably narrowly defined that a little too much. So you should be able to do that. I will work on trying to figure out why we are now they're wanting to charge us more. I will say even at $7 if we have to do it, it's cheaper than having had it gone through the bookstore. All right, so I'm going to move these down just so they're a little out of the way. So inside of valuable videos, there are again about 30 hours worth of videos, some really good content. I picked out a couple that are recent and focused towards the PMBOK 6 because there are a few differences. And so I put them down here. So here's our project charter. This one I think is probably the better video in terms of content, but it's 2.5 hours long. That is, we are in an 8-week class. There is a lot of content to cover. This does it very, very well. This one is targeted towards preparing for the PMP exam / the CAPM also. So this one does a really great job. It's got a lot of detail, but again, there is a lot of material in here. So you might want to break it up into chunks as you start going through there. These guys do a really nice job, this particular organization. There is another one, very similar content, also I think very well done. When I looked at them, these guys, Master of Project Academy, do a really good job. This one is slightly shorter, so I would pick one of those at least to go through and watch. So it will take you some time to go through there, and they will do a very thorough job. We're going to do kind of the 1-hour highline overview, and that's one of the issues in these 8-week classes. We're shoving a lot of information. But the reality is, according to the Carnegie model for education, how many hours equal a 3-hour college degree? Does anybody know off the top of your head? 176. No. But close. So what we consider is that for a 3-hour course, for 3 credit hours, you should have a minimum of 145 hours. Or 135, sorry, 135 hours. So when you look at that in terms of a class, and you look at an 8-week course, that really means for one class, you're going to spend 15 to 16 hours in that particular class. That's a lot of time. But the other piece of that is that includes class time, in time, and so we try to balance it out. So when we have a 2-hour video, I know that's a lot of content, but it follows in that model that we have to try to get you guys to that level. That's what all colleges and universities work towards, is that same model. So does that mean you're always going to work 15 hours in a course for a week? No. There may be some that you are naturally gifted at that go very quickly. There are others you may work on. For example, I know the one that sometimes students spend a lot of time on or a statistics class. You may spend 20 hours in a week doing it. But that hourly model is also how we derived that you can be considered a full-time student at 12 credit hours. Because you are working over 40 hours a week in a 16-week course with 4 classes, if they're all done this way. Now, have we all taken classes that took us literally half an hour outside of class? Yeah. And we've taken ones that made us pull our hair out? Yeah. But, so I just want to explain on those videos. I know they're long. Break them up. You can remember where you stopped off. So take them in 15, 20, 30-minute segments or a natural stopping point, and then go back in and take a look at them again. Don't do it at 11 o'clock when it's a rainy night, because they will immediately put you to sleep, right? Or maybe you can do that and you don't have to take your melatonin or Ambien for the evening. So there's a lot of information there. We're going to take a look at some of the key items in the, I hesitate to call it a textbook, but our book, our framework. And when we look at this, we have a couple of math things that show up again. And let me see if I have that open somewhere. Maybe did I remember to? I thought I did. All right, so the 7 deals all with the idea of cost management. Costs really are why we're here in college. Most of us are getting business degrees. You're really here because of dollars and cents, right? And that's what drives most businesses. And we already know that those time estimates that we worked on the other day drive a lot of our project costs. And so we're going to look at some other pieces then and how they interact and how we can estimate costs and how we can control costs inside of our project. So again, these overviews are a really handy way to see, further down, to see what's involved. So notice that overview of all of 7. So we have the plan, we have the estimating costs, budgeting, we have controlling costs, and then it lists like inputs and tools and things we can use. So these, when you start studying, these are a really great way to look at that chapter and see what kinds of things are in there. It gives you an idea what's in there. And so a lot of times you'll see we use some repetitive things. So you may see expert judgment or meetings, but they don't tell you exactly what we're doing in there. We're going to look at something called earned value. So there's some analysis. And when you do a project, sometimes we're going to use those things, earned value, so we can determine how our project is proceeding. So, a couple of things. We know that all of our projects are unique. We need to understand the budgeting processes of our organization. We need to understand whether that project takes a lot of initial cash up front, whether it's a linear drawdown in terms of cash. So we need to understand what that project looks like. So if I am going to build a project where I am going to come into the college, maybe the college got $1 million grant and they're going to upgrade all of the classrooms with technology. Does that seem like a great project? Yeah, it really would. If you guys could get on writing that grant and find somebody to do that, I would be more than happy to help with that. But the reality is, let's see if this has unlocked us again. That project, we have to look at it in terms of where those costs come in. So, draw. You drew the other day. Yep, pink. Pink is fine. So, we know that we have costs, and costs go up here. And we know we have time. Time goes here. And why is... You guys can't see that on there, can you? Well, that's really handy. Hang on a second. Let me try something else. We could yesterday, right? Or 2 days ago. Sorry. All right, let me do a bigger one and see if that shows up. Huh. Well, that's interesting. Maybe I can't do that today. Disconnect from desktop. Let me try this real quick and reconnect. See if that will do it. Waiting for screen. Change screens back. Hit the drawing tool. Yay! I can draw on the screen again. Life is good. Okay. So that's our chart. And we know that costs go up over time. So time, and here's our costs. So a lot of projects, depending on what they do, they may have what we call a linear cash model. So in other words, all along the project, it's really just labor, and it really doesn't change much. It's kind of the same all the way through the project. But some projects, so I said, hey, we're going to get $1 million grant. We're going to put all kinds of technology in classrooms. We have to purchase all that equipment up front, right? So we're purchasing projectors, we're purchasing servers, computers, whatever it else. So that project over time starts out very expensive and then may tailor off to just a labor cost. Does that make sense? So how we draw that out, how our accounting system works with that. We may have other projects that start out very slow, ramp up to a large cost. And so we need to understand a little bit about our timeline and how our project works over time also in here. So that's one thing. Agile approaches can work differently in terms of managing projects, that estimating budget. So part of it, we actually have to figure out what we have existing in our business. So if I come in as a newcomer to this company as a project manager, the first thing I'm going to have to do is sit down with a budgeting person and figure out, how does your financial systems work? The state college system works significantly different than a private business, doesn't it? Yeah. And unfortunately, if you read the news, apparently we won't talk about the accounting issues we had. But different businesses work differently. If you work for a small independent business and you're doing a project, it's going to work differently again because those have different financial structures. So you need to be aware of those incoming pieces. And we need to figure out this idea of planned cost management. So we know we have a couple of things that feed into that. So our project charter, we've got a lot of pieces in there. And that project charter, we've done a rough guess about what a project costs. Now we're trying to come up with a little better idea about what happens in there. But there's some other things that can happen. So during our project, can the market or what's going on in the world around us change our costs? So think about our project. We're building this system with new projectors. Could projectors suddenly get much cheaper? They might. So suddenly they came out with a new laser model projector and it's only $100 instead of $5,000 for ones like these. That could happen. But could the opposite happen? Could market forces drive up our project? We're going to use a lot of wiring and copper. Copper is inside of the wiring. Could the copper price go way up? And could that affect our price? And we don't have any control over those facts of the market. We can anticipate and we can hope we understand what's going to happen, but the reality is sometimes those things like copper prices can spike up and make a significant change. I was involved in a project on a networking project, and we had to purchase network cable. And so those of you that have been in my class in here, we brought out a spool of 1,000 feet. It's a box about 2 foot by 2 foot. It's got 1,000 foot of cabling in it. So those normally, depending on the type of cabling, are $150 to $300. Well, a couple of years ago, I was involved in a project, and that price started to spike on copper. Well, copper is one of the main ingredients in there. And for the cabling we needed, which was called a plenum-rated cabling, and there were some other things we needed with it, it was going to soon look like it was going to jump to over $500 a box. So we changed our project a little bit, and we actually rented warehouse space and bought the cabling and all the pieces ahead of time, about 6 months ahead of the project actually kicking off, because it looked very much like those environmental factors were going to change our costs enough that our entire project was going to change. Now, in this particular case, we needed about 250,000 feet of cable. That's a lot of cable. And when that price goes up, it was going to make about a $30,000 to $40,000 difference in the cost of that project. It was going to significantly change it. So we also have to be aware of that. Different companies can also have different organizational cultures that we need to be aware of and things that will happen, especially multinational corporations. So we know that the culture of a company in Auburn is probably different than in Omaha, but now if we're suddenly working in Asia or another country, that culture may change significantly also. So we also look at those kinds of things. So one of the most important things we look at, so those financial controls. Most companies have done projects in the past. What kind of historical information is available? So even those external things, what's the cost of copper in that wiring? Historical. We may have existing cost estimation tools inside of this corporation. It may be very formal. There may be other guidelines we have that we need to deal with. A couple of other things we need to make sure that we're looking at. So this plan, we want to make sure that we document what our units of measure are. You think, well, that's really silly. But now that we've got multinational corporations, making sure that we're all in the same units of dollars, our quantities are all in the same types of units. So cubic meters and cubic yards are two different ways to measure and a volume, but it can be very detrimental if we don't have the same units. We also need to think about accuracy. So in our budgeting originally, so that project charter, we may have a plus or minus of 25% is our estimate. By the time we make a very detailed plan now we may say we're at a 10% level of accuracy. We think we're within 10% plus or minus of that final cost. So those things will tighten up the further into a project we get. We may have even rules about rounding and different pieces. So that estimating cost, we're going to look at some of those tools that we have available. And these are very scary. Very scary tools. Go back in here. So we know we're taking things out of that charter. I'll shoot past it because I'll do that here again. Process assets. All right, so couple of ways that we can do this. So parametric estimating. So the same as with our time. We know that in a lot of cases our costs are based against another value. So we talked about Spencer's house and using per square footage as a cost. That's really common. So in networking, when we decide that we're going to do a big project and put in network cables in a building, we know that the average cost is maybe $109 for each outlet we put on the wall. So we could use those as an estimate. That's that idea, that parametric. So something else gives us that estimate. Bottom up means that we are estimating each individual component. And then we have a couple of measures, and we introduced you to them in the other day, and so they haven't obviously changed. So the idea, we do those 3-point estimates. So there is what they call the triangle, or just the 3-point where you divide by 3. So you still have the same thing. Most likely, most pessimistic, and an optimist, or a most realistic. So they call them most likely. I usually use realistic. So you have a high, a low, and one that's kind of in the middle. And what they're showing you is you can simply do a triangle distribution. So triangle doesn't weight it towards anything. So you have all three of them divided by 3. This beta, which is what I showed you before, has that weight in it. So the most realistic number, or most common number you're going to run into, you weight it with 4. So that is the same formula that we worked on before. Those are easy. If we use that easiest stuff in stats, you guys would all love it, right? But it's just a way we do that. We call it this horrible thing called a beta distribution. Really all we're saying is we're making a average, but we're weighting it with what we think is most likely going to happen. So, in our project, you're going to find out almost always we do something with reserves. So sometimes you'll call them contingencies, you may call them emergency reserves. We need to come up with a plan because we know that our projects are not going to go always as planned. That something is going to happen the world is going to explode in some manner, we usually have some kind of a reserve analysis that we do, and we look at what we're going to put in there for that reserve. So, we'll talk a lot more about that reserve, but how we get to it here is kind of interesting. So, you're going to see a term in here, Project Management Information System. So what's the one we introduced you to? We made you already do a look at it a little bit and you compare them. So Microsoft Project, there are other ones. A lot of other ones out there. And depending on the system, they may interface directly with your billing system, with your accounting information system, with your payroll. And so we can even pull that data from one to the other really, really easily. Otherwise, I may spend a lot of time putting in things on my own. So estimates are just that. Estimates are a guess. And they're never 100% accurate. If you could guess the cost of something 100%, I'm going to take you to Vegas and we're going to bet on some sports games because you would probably also be able to predict every sport game out there. But there's a lot of things in there that we're going to take estimates of. So in here they list labor, materials, equipment, services. They may have inflation allowances, cost of financing, because we know that over time, in a very short project, time doesn't have much effect on money. But over a 2-year project, and if that project were several $1 million, that does have an effect. That TVM, time value of money, can certainly play into what our project is going to cost and where we get that financing from. So we've got to the point where we're going to determine our budget. So we've got our plan, and now we're looking at these cost estimates. So one of the things that can also happen as we go through here, you start almost like a brainstorming process. And so we start updating a lot of pieces as we go into this. And so one of them we start updating is that risk register. And in fact, that's one of the newer classes we've had. How many of you are taking risk analysis in this? No? It's an interesting course, I think. That idea of looking at what kind of risks are out there and what we're going to do with them. So, we put all of these documents together. We use our expert judgment. And now we have to come up with a model that we're going to do. So, history tells us a lot. And in fact, there's a lot of statements. If anybody here a history major? No. Ah, darn it. So we always have these statements about those who don't know the lessons of history are doomed to repeat the failures. Well, that very much holds true in business and in projects. So if we don't look at what we've done in the past, look what other companies have done in the past, our model's probably not very accurate. If, on the other hand, we use that historical data, we know that this happened previously, we can use it as a verifiable model. We can also look at, there's a lot of, hopefully, documentation about what went right and went wrong. Even on the financial information, so we estimated things at a $1 a unit. We found out they cost $1.25 a unit. That information can be very useful to us as we move through this. Financing is another area we need to think about. So, how many of you think when you go build a house, do you just pay cash for it? Most people don't pay cash for large projects, do they? No. But when we go get that money, and the bank has requirements, and so part of the things that happen in terms of financing, if you go say, I'm going to go build a house for $250,000, does the bank give you a check for $250,000? No. They set markers along there, milestones, and in most cases, so they will allow $100,000 when the framing's up, and they will allow you to pay your subcontract. Maybe you get it dried in and the interior done, but not checklist. Oh, there's the other 100,000. And they may say you have to hold 25,000 back for a year as a contingency against that contractor, and that contractor doesn't get paid for a year. And so that financing, how those financing models work, can change a lot about how we develop our project estimates, because that financing does cost us money. Money is expensive, whether it's coming out of a checking account. So even if we're Apple and we have $70 billion sitting in a bank, using that money means that we are giving up opportunity for something else. So I can't buy two companies for $70 billion. So we have that opportunity cost of financing, or we have that explicit cost of money. In other words, that interest rate of money. So even to how that money gets drawn out, we need to know that procedure, and we need to know those costs, because it can raise the cost of your project. If the only way you can get financing is something like venture capital financing, and you're paying 10 or 15% interest, does that make your project significantly more expensive? And you're like, I saw some of you pop up because you've seen the ads for houses where you can pay 3% interest, right? So why would a company to do a project spend 10 or 12 or 15% interest? They're built, well, so think about it this way. When you build a house, you have something solid and concrete. If you don't pay, what does the bank do? They foreclose and they come take it back, right? But you go to the bank and you say, I'm going to build a new app for iPhones that I think is going to generate money in the future, and I need $1 million. Do they have anything they can come foreclose on? No. And so in a lot of cases, the more speculative that project we're doing, the more expensive that money is going to get to obtain, whether it's internal or external funding. And so venture capitalists, so if our company has to go out and borrow money from what's called a venture capitalist, it gets very expensive. So those venture capitalists want to make money just like a bank does, but they know that a certain percentage of these projects are going to fail. And so if I'm in software, it's pretty speculative, and my costs are very high to borrow money and keep my company or that project going. So that cost of financing can get very expensive, and we need to figure that into our budgeting process. And if we're paying 10 or 15 or 25% cost, it gets very, very expensive very quickly. So we get all of those pieces all wrapped up together. We followed whatever model our business has, and we created a final budget, a cost baseline. So not only is it cost, but it's cost over time. Does that make sense? We know where we're going to spend money at a particular point in time. That cost baseline then is what we're going to use to measure then how our project is going as it progresses. So this is a really great idea of what's happening here. And so notice, this has got a lot of those pieces all wrapped up into this chart. And I know you guys can't see me point, but notice that our cost baseline, this black line, our cost black line is one line. That's our cost baseline. That's our project over time. We know to do this, we have specific funding pieces and when they occur. So notice we have, for example, maybe we'd call that the initial draw on our house, different pieces if we're looking at that as a house. Our expenditures then, so if I looked at this right at that first funding requirement, does our project look like it is ahead of schedule in terms of cost? So our expenditures right at this particular point in time are less than our cost baseline. What does that tell us right there? Does that seem like our project is ahead in terms of cost right there? Well, it looks like it. It looks like our cost is lower. And it looks like we're below our projected cost all the way up to here, doesn't it? But what we don't see in here, Does this tell us a percentage of project completion directly in this chart? No. And so we also need some information about what's going on here in this particular chart to get a complete view. But it looks like we're ahead. And if we think that these funding requirements are tied to a completion percentage, so if we thought this was a house and at this first one that is the framing done, then I would say we probably are ahead in terms of cost. Maybe our costs haven't been as expensive, but some of that could also be things that we haven't got bills for. So maybe we're to hear our frames up, and it looks right now our expenditures are lower, but you know what? The guy with the concrete truck has never sent us a bill yet, so we don't know exactly what that cost is. So there's a lot of pieces in there we don't know. But it gives us that idea that those are independent entities, and we need to be able to somehow track those and take a look at them. So, how those funding requirements. So they may just be based on time. If they're based just on time, that chart didn't tell us anything about that project yet in terms of what's going to happen. So, we need some tools to control costs. This is the ugly piece. Monitoring and controlling things like cost. Budgets are no fun, are they? Does anybody like to have to live on a budget? Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be just nice to be like Jeff Bezos and just be able to spend whatever you wanted for an entire month? Wouldn't that be fun? And you could do that. You guys could go out and spend whatever you want for a month, but then the next 8 months you're going to catch up to it, right? So we need some ways to look at this and see if we're on task, on time, on budget. So we're going to look at it, how we can control that project. So, ensuring that we don't spend more than the authorized funding. Certainly that. Bringing expected cost overruns or unexpected cost overruns if they happen to happen. We want to have that method to stop unauthorized pieces from being added to our project. So we're going to get a lot of tools. And so as I come down here, I look at this. The book says, all right, we're going to use in this value, this thing they call expert judgment. That's usually where the tools land. We're going to do something called variance analysis. So did you guys do variance analysis in business finance? Yeah. You're like, all of a sudden it looks like flashbacks from Vietnam in here. You guys are like, oh no. He's going to make us look at stuff that we used before. Yeah. There's something called earned value analysis. We may look at other forecasting and other financial tools. So one of the most common things we do is called earned value analysis. Earned value analysis really just says, if you want to think about it, we have a couple of different values in there, but we're really saying, is the project at the point we think it is it ahead or behind of what we think it is in terms of cost? So we have a couple of numbers. So we have a planned value. So at this particular point in time, we think planned value will be $100. And we can look at that earned value. So that earned value says, all right, we think that work, we are now at $80 worth of earned value. So we've done something, but it's not $100 worth. And then we can actually look at those actual costs. So what is the actual cost of getting to that $80 worth of value? And we can see if we're ahead or behind, because maybe weather has delayed us. Our planned value said today we're going to be at $100 worth of earned value. But weather has slowed us down, and we laid off a couple of employees, and we're only at $80 worth of earned value. That sounds bad. We're behind on schedule, right? Does that make sense? But we may be ahead on cost, because it may have only cost us $75 in expenses to get to $80 worth of earned value. So the sad thing here is we don't have enough time to go through and make you guys torture you repeatedly over variance analysis. But there's a couple of formulas here. So cost variance is earned value minus actual cost. So I said we had an earned value of $80. Our actual costs were $75. We had a positive $5 cost variance. That's great, right? We're ahead on cost. Woohoo! But we also can look at schedule. So schedule variance is earned value minus planned value. Oh. Well, earned value, we're at 80, and our planned value is 100, so we're behind on schedule. So this one tool can tell us whether we're ahead or behind both on cost and on schedule. It's not a horrible set of formulas, right? So we also have this variance at completion. So that means at the end of our project we look at it. But the schedule variance and the cost variance, these two that we use quite a bit during a project, that really just says they're not horrible formulas. So schedule variance, earned value minus planned value. And so if we've built more than we anticipated at that time, we're ahead on a schedule. Cost variance then is just earned value minus actual cost. So if you think about it, same formula. One of them we take out the planned value. One of them we take out the actual cost. So they're not a real tough set of formulas. Those are not like all those ratios you had to learn in some of your other business classes. But they are really important to know how we get to that document, how we get there. So we have some others that we use. So now we get to those horrible things. Scheduled performance index. So this really says earned value divided by planned value. So if we're at 1 means we're exactly on schedule, right? So rather than just a raw number, now we get that ratio. And remember from business finance, ratios can tell us a lot. So the one I always use is if my business made $1 million last year, does that tell me anything about my business? If my profit last year was $1 million, does that tell me anything? It doesn't look at the inputs. So if that's $1 million on $1 billion worth of sales, so if I'm Amazon size, but I only made $1 million, that's pretty poor, right? But on the other hand, if I made $1 million and I only put in 50,000, I did really, really good. And so that's what these values can do for us, is these indexes can give us that ratio. So if it's 1, that means we're exactly on line. So our earned value divided by actual cost, if those are equal, that means we're exactly on cost. So if both of those are 1, that's great. But what we'd like to see, if a project goes not on according to schedule, would we want to see those greater or less than 1? So let's plug a number in, and let's just think about it this way. So I'm going to make up some just small numbers so it's easy to do in our head. So let's say we're going to do the schedule performance. So our earned value, we're going to say it's 100, whatever it is, $100, 100 units, whatever it is. Our planned value is 120. So that equation then would say 100 divided by 120. So that equals some kind of ratio slightly under 1, doesn't it? Like 0.87, maybe somewhere close to that. So what does that say? That says we are behind on our schedule, right? We have not earned as much as what we planned to, so we're behind, if you want to think about it in terms of common sense. But if I'm comparing two projects, I can make a comparison about how they are and how far they are behind. If I just gave you a raw number and said we're 20 units behind, that doesn't tell you anything in terms of scope. It just is a raw number. So the same sets of numbers, but now I'm going to do this performance cost, this cost performance index. So I need earned value, and I have that. And now I need, instead of planned value for completion, I need my actual cost. And so in this case, maybe my actual cost were 80 units of whatever. And so now I'm at 1 point, let's just call it 2. I know that's not it. But we have a ratio above 1. So that tells me that financially, in terms of cost, I'm actually ahead, right? Now, we would like them to always be 1, but it gives us this ability to measure a project over time. And so at those milestones, we know that a planned value is going to be a particular value, and we can look at what the actuals are, and we can do some calculating and figure that out. And look at that, I can make it all go away. So we look at that, and one of the things we can do then is, instead of just one particular point in time, we can look at it over a historical time frame. Now, if this is a 1-week project, you're not going to do this. If this is a 2-year project, sure, this is a great way to see what's happening over time, and it spots that trend. And so maybe what I'm looking at here is my planned values way up here, my earned values here. If I go ahead and project out into the future, I may be in trouble on this project. It may not get done on time. Or I look at the cost and notice where my cost curve is as I project it up. That cost curve is, well, we're well into that reserve or that contingency fund. And in fact, I'm going to say at completion, we're above even that number, aren't we? So we do these tools. What this allows us to do, if I look ahead, is now I can start to figure out root cause analysis, or I can start to figure out why we're behind on value and over on cost. What has happened? And maybe it's something we can't control. Maybe we had a union strike and all of our union workers are now making twice as much money. Something we can't control. But we may change the project in other ways then to bring those costs down. So instead of putting in all the windows in our building, we may eliminate them or go with cheaper models or something so we can do that. So, complete performance index. So there's another formula we can use in here. So this one's just a little more complicated, but none of these are beyond what you guys can do. So that one takes 2 different values and you're subtracting that earned value and actual value, and then you're making a ratio of those. So you look at one number that looks at both sides of the equation. So here is a chart that has all different kinds of numbers and values and formulas in it. I would look at this chart and make sure you understand how these work. It's a shortcut for all those formulas. So it also has all the names on it. So if you forget what BAC is, budget at completion, hey, look, it's right up there. There's no formula for it. It just gives us my terms. And then as I scroll down here, I get a lot of these different values that we have. And then it gives on the right-hand side over here, it will even give us a set of values, what they are. So here's our ratios for CPI and SPI. So greater than 1 ahead of schedule, exactly 1 on schedule, less than 1 behind schedule. So this chart is a really great resource for looking at some of that information. Those similar kinds of things, so you're like, oh my gosh, all these numbers, I got to memorize them and remember how to do all those. The reality is, most projects you're using some kind of an information systems tool for. Microsoft Project, one of the great things it can do, if you on the front end put in all the values for labor, cost of materials, everything else is in there, guess what it does for you? At any point, you can run those values and you can see things like that trend analysis. So the other thing when our stakeholders is what's really great, in most cases it's not just stored just on your computer, it's actually done on a server. It may be done online in like that Monday.com for your entire team. That sponsor can click on it. Any of those stakeholders can click on it and can look at it and see how our project is going on a fairly regular basis. Now, if we only report numbers every month, it's probably a little less useful. So one of the worst things we do in a project to screw up our budget and our timeline is something called change requests. A lot of times you'll see them as listed as change orders. It is horrible. And here's why. We made this plan. Now we know there's something that came up that's going to change that. So we have that budget contingency. And quite frankly, on most projects, we just do this. We say, all right, so our original project was $1 million. We're going to add 10% of that or $100,000 to it as a contingency. So there's all kinds of models to determine exactly what your contingency would be. And you may look historically at projects, how they budgeted and what their percentage of that was used for a contingency. But 10% is used pretty commonly, quite frankly. So we have a change order. We find something's different. We're going to build this plan on our labs, and we're going to put in all these projectors. And as soon as we rip the ceiling down and start putting them in, we discover that the concrete slabs are falling in above your head. Oh no, now we're going to have to fix that. And so that's going to cost $200,000. So we have $1 million project and $200,000 worth of a change. Suddenly our project is off the rails, right? Is that your fault as a project manager automatically? You should have known that ceiling was bad, right? So there are times when those are out of our control. Part of the value of this change management process is, as a project manager, it takes it out of your control. You are not alone responsible. You have a voice on it, and you could say, I think that's great. We probably need to do this, but that ultimate responsibility goes to either a committee or your sponsor or somebody above you. And so it's a great way we can look at how we can avoid those costs and our project failing. All right, so you do have a quiz due this week. You do not have a paper. That paper is actually due next week on Sunday. Should you be looking at it? I will look into why Harvard Business School decided to work just like Academus Books and try to get another $3 out of you. That's interesting, and I don't know. That's odd and has changed. So we will look at that and figure that out. If I have to use a different case, because this is listed in the student cases, but for whatever reason, if we have to use a different case, I will send that to you as quickly as I can, hopefully this afternoon. They're usually pretty responsive. Unlike Academus, these guys are fairly responsive in terms of time to us. All right, any questions about costs? Anybody here want to live on an unlimited budget like Jeff Bezos? No? You wouldn't like that, Justin? That would be horrible to have to tell, today am I going to drive the Ferrari or the Lamborghini, right? You have that issue already because, no, nobody has that issue. I certainly don't. It's whether I drive the Prius or the Prius. There's just no dignity there. All right, guys. Have a great weekend. Hopefully it is going to actually stop raining today. I have no hope, but we hope it will.